phase one of this ceasefire deal nears its end, the fate of the all-important phase two, that seems to be hanging by a thread. So joining me now is the founder of the George Mason University Cyber and Tech Center and National Security Institute founder, Jamil Jaffer. Jamil, really appreciate your time. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said this about the handover of the Bibas family.
All of Israel is united in grief. And as the Prime Minister of Israel, I vow that I will not rest until the savages who executed our hostages are brought to justice. They do not deserve to walk this earth. Nothing will stop me. Nothing.
When you think about the death of those two little boys, and certainly their mother, you understand where the Prime Minister is coming from to a certain extent. Do you think we could see military reprisal for the death of the Bibas family?
Well, you know, Alicia, I was in Israel just a couple of months ago at the site near Oz, the kibbutz, where the Bibas family lived and where they were kidnapped from. And it's horrific what happened there. People burned in their homes alive. We then went to the Nova Festival site where these young people were killed and murdered and young women raped. Just horrific things that were done. There's no doubt that what Israel needs to do is to destroy Hamas and take it to pieces. A significant chunk of that's been done, but you can see from these handovers that there's still a number of terrorists running around Gaza with weapons, wearing masks. These are people, by the way, who won't even show their faces even as they hand over these hostages because they're afraid. They're afraid of what will happen, and they should be afraid. Hamas has been taken to its knees, Hezbollah as well, but more needs to be done to get them really under the thumb and get them out of the way.
Yeah, we're looking right now at a live look at the military base where the hostages were released and then, of course, taken after to hospital to receive care that they certainly need. As we're talking about the Bibas family, the remains of Sherry, being received by her family in Israel. The reality is that the Bibas family has actually been pretty critical of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and the way that he has handled these hostages. Family members have been critical. For example, Afri Bibas Levi saying this. He says, quote, "There is no forgiveness for abandoning them on October 7th and no forgiveness for abandoning them in captivity. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, we did not receive an apology from you in this painful moment." Now, he was not the only one. Upon learning that Sherry's remains have been returned today, the Bibas family more broadly had this to say. They said, "In this difficult time, we continue to demand the immediate return of all of the remaining hostages. Nothing is more important than that. There will be no healing without them." Does the Bibas family have a point here in saying the Prime Minister should, prioritize diplomacy over revenge right now?
Well, look, this isn't about revenge. This is about preventing a future terrorist attack against Israel and against any of America's allies. But look, this has been a debated issue now since the October 7th attacks about how to resolve the hostage situation, what it takes to get that done. There's still a lot of trauma about the horrific things that were done and the need to get the hostages back. We're now at the point in the ceasefire where the 25 living Israeli hostages that were supposed to be turned over have now been turned over. Now the question is what happens about phase two? Will the remaining hostages be turned over? Will the remaining bodies be turned over? And will Israel be able to agree to a longer-term ceasefire in exchange for security guarantees? And that turns on what happens to the people in Gaza, what happens to Hamas there. President Trump has weighed in saying that we're going to move 2 million Gazans out of Gaza into Egypt, into Jordan. None of that makes any sense. Obviously, there is no plan for doing that. There is no effective way to do that. We saw how hard it was for Israel to take a few thousand settlers out of Gaza back in the early 2000s. That's not realistic and not going to happen. So the question then is, how do we get to the next stage, ensuring Israel has the security it needs, gets back all of its hostages, and Hamas is no longer an effective fighting force?
I think it's fair to say, the next question is, how do we get to the next phase? And that's, something we're, of course, following closely. The U.S. ambassador to Israel, former Arkansas Governor Mike Huckabee, actually spoke this morning on Morning in America. I want you to take a look and a listen really quickly.
I think the president's been very clear that Hamas cannot remain in Gaza. President Trump has been absolute in his resolve that these are not people that you can sit down and say, okay, you can go back to governing Gaza, you can control it again. He's made it clear that's not going to happen.
We have seen from these hostage exchanges that Hamas is obviously very firmly in control of Gaza. Is it possible to get them to step down, without further fighting?
Look, I think it's going to be very difficult. And the question is, who's going to step in when we take Hamas out of power in Gaza? The Palestinian Authority lacks credibility today. Abu Mazen, the head of the Palestinian Authority, is old. So the question is there some other third party that can get credibility with the Gazan people, bring security, give Israel the security guarantee it needs, and effectively stave off Hamas? That is a very hard thing to do in that tight, compact space, particularly after all that's been done to take Hamas out. So this is a very difficult question. It's going to require the U.S. engaging, Governor Huckabee engaging actively. But of course, this idea of moving 2 million Gazans out, not realistic, but the president keeps pressing it, even though his Secretary of State and National Security Advisor are trying to walk that back.
Jamil, before I let you go, I want to turn to Ukraine for a second. Another kind of agreement that the Trump administration is trying to handle delicately. We know that Trump and President Zelensky in Ukraine really have been engaging in this kind of war of words, if you will, following some high-level meetings between the U.S. and Russia this week. When you see and hear what has been said, and then you think of the context, of the last couple of years, how we have been an ally to Ukraine. Is Ukraine in a bit of trouble now with the Trump administration and potential aid, going to that country for this war?
Well, look, they're definitely in trouble. President Trump made clear during the campaign that he intends to end this war quickly. In fact, he said he was going to end it before he even took office. That obviously hasn't happened. And this war of words between President Trump and President Zelensky is not helpful. At the end of the day, what needs to happen is Russia needs to get its troops out of Ukraine. It's not acceptable that they invaded Ukraine back in 2014. Barack Obama did nothing about it. Now we're here. They invaded in 2022. They've taken more land. At the end of the day, there has to be a settlement of this. The war has to end, but it cannot end with Russia succeeding in keeping territory. If they do, all they'll do, as we saw in 2014 when Barack Obama failed, they'll just do it again in a few years from now. They'll go back in, they'll take more land, and our friends in the Baltics and Poland have got to be worried. This is not acceptable. We've got to get this right, and that has to involve Ukraine getting its territory back.
All right, we continue to follow and watch. Really appreciate your insight. The founder of the George Mason University Cyber and Tech Center and National Security Institute founder, Jamil Jaffer. Thank you.
Thanks, Lisa.